Guns N' Roses' Appetite for Destruction was one of the epic albums that came out in the late 80s, early 90s. And Duff McKagan's bass sound, along with Slash's guitar work, made this album outstanding. If you want that gritty Appetite for Destruction bass tone, or the polished arena rock sound that Def Leppard brought to us, you don't need a truckload of rack gear. What you need is the Gallien-Kruger 800RB with its signature growl and punch. But how do you get that inside a small box like the HX Stomp? Hey, I'm Twisty, and if you're chasing that clean but growly bass tone that cuts through the wall of guitars, this video is going to be all about the Gallien-Kruger 800RB and Line 6 Helix's version. This is the amp, as long as their ability to play, of course, and their music, and probably their hair in the 80s. But apart from that, this amp is what made Duff McKagan famous. I'm going to break down the amp's legacy, why it was so important, and what made it so unique when it was released, and then how to get a Guns N' Roses type sound out of your bass through your Helix. Let's check it out. So many bass players want that tone that's present, it's punchy, and it's clean without getting too muddy. Well, that'd be me. Hopefully it's you. And you don't want to be buried in the mix. But here's the challenge, right? Some rigs are warm or fuzzy, and others are very thin and scooped. Trying to get that 80s punch that blended both together, which is a tone like Duff McKagan had punching through a 2-guitar rock band that still has tight and low-end power, is the dream. And that's exactly what the Gallien-Kruger 800RB was built for, and the Helix model, I think, nails it. Released in 1982, the Gallien-Kruger 800RB quickly became a go-to amp for touring pro bassists in the rock field. Duff McKagan of Guns N' Roses, Flea from the Red Hot Chili Peppers used one in his early career. Rick Savage of Def Leppard created that great arena rock sound out of the Gallien-Kruger. I was first introduced to the sound of this amp through the Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction album. And for years, this was the tone that I was striving for to achieve. The Gallien-Kruger 800RB pioneered a number of things that today in the bass world we take for granted. They were the first amp to put a DI output on the back of the amp, allowing the bassist to go straight from the head out to front of house or to the recording desk. Again, almost every amp on the market today has that feature, but in '82, this was the first amp that allowed that. This gave studio engineers the ability to add IRs for cabinet configurations in the desk for post-recording, but get that clean bass tone with a bit of growl in it that the amp was providing. The other real advantage of using the GK at the time was its ability to bi-amp. So the amp had 2 power stages, a preamp stage for tone control, and then 2 power stages to drive 2 independent speaker cabinet configurations. The first power amp had 300 watts of capability for dealing with low frequencies, and the other was 100 watts to deal with the higher end frequencies, allowing the bassist to split the signals between 2 cabinets. The next amp that I saw that capability on was the Ampeg SVT4 Pro. Now, it may be available on a number of others in the market, but that was the next one that I saw that capability on. So why did everybody in the 80s and the 90s start to love this particular amp stack? The GK sound is tight, it's clean, and it's very mid-scooped. It can growl when you push the drive, and it's almost been created with a pick player or an 80s rock pick player in mind. It's great for slap, it's great for stadium rock, and being a solid state or transistor amp, it's really sturdy when used for traveling musicians. So valves become unseated, they break, they become rattled, whereas a transistor amp is, as it says, solid state, and it travels a lot better. So putting it up against the Fenders and the Orange and the Ampegs of the time, if you were short on cash and didn't want to have thousands of spares in case the tube broke in the truck, then this was a go-to backline for stadium gigs. So what made the GK800RB's tone so special? Well, it's a rack mountable solid state head which only weighs about 25 pounds. Now with the introduction of new Class D amps like my MarkBass, I could get that weight right down, but remember in the 80s and 90s this was probably the lightest amp for its power on the market. It runs 300 watts of power at 4 ohms for the lows and 100 watts at 8 ohms for the highs. But if you ran it in single mode or full mode as they refer to it as, then one cabinet stack behind it would run at 300 watts at 4 ohms. The 4-band active EQ allows the boost or cut of bass, low mids, high mids, and treble. The cab also then has a section around voicing. There is a low cut that rolls off the extreme deep bass to tighten the sound and also help protect the speakers from low-end rumble. There's a high boost that adds a high-end presence to the tone. And then there's a mid contour which scoops the mid-range out at around 500 hertz. So it basically turns you into a smiley face just with the click of that. And that button by itself helped to give that 80s rock tone that we hear in Appetite for Destruction or some of the Def Leppard albums from that period. As you boost the gain and the preamp, the circuit's designed to give a bit of growl to the sound. So even though it's a transistor or solid state amp, rather than going straight for clipping, the circuit's been designed to introduce or simulate the feel of pushing the tube power amp. So it gives that grit as if you were driving an SVT to its limit. The amp has massive clean headroom. So driving the volume out of this without it distorting with faster transient response. So it's great for pick players or slap players who are looking for that instant response to what you're playing with massive headroom. Again, this made this amp stand out across its peers. The tone itself is not tube-like. It's bright, it's dry, and it's punchy. It's perfect for DUFF McKagan's pick attack and that ultra clear bass line sound that you'll get in Def Leppard or Tom Hamilton from Aerosmith. If you're wanting that mellow, old school or Motown type style, then this amp will work, but you'll get a closer tone to what you're looking for from an SVT. So check the video out above to see how an SVT might fit you better than the Gallien-Kruger. Now, as with any amp, you can pair any cabinet you like to this, but the classic GK rig for that 80s and 90s rock sound was a split cabinet configuration using the 410s for the highs and a 1x15 for the lows, and connecting that in as to that dual amp configuration. The amp's power stage allowed a crossover frequency to be adjusted between 100 hertz and up to 1 kilohertz to adjust which frequency you send to which cabinet. So 500 hertz or the 12 o'clock position of the dial seemed to be where that 80s, 90s rock sound seemed to come from. So everything below 500 hertz would be sent to the 300 watt power amp and then out by the 1x15 cabinet. Anything above 500 Hertz would then be sent out through the 100 watt power amp to the 4x10. This allowed each cabinet to handle the frequency it was best to respond to, and the amp to be able to drive how it needed to. So the 1x15 would give that deep bass thump, and the 4x10 would then give that punch in the mids, and then blending those together, so each power amp had its own individual volume control, blending those cabs together give you that ultimate sound. And while a 4x10 and a 1x15 was probably the most common configuration, Flea from Red Hot Chili Peppers, his early GK rig was a 2x15 and a 2x10. When your amp's running in full mode, so rather than having it bi-ampable, having it running as one power amp stage, it was also common to see the Ampeg 8x10 fridge cabinets. And like any other amp in this mode, you put any cabinet configuration that you would like to have. Commonly a 4x10 with a 1x15 or 2x12s. And as I said, the 8x10 cabinet. Being able to run as both a full amp and a bi-ampable mode, as well as the solid state build with a bit of growl in it, you can see why these 80s and 90s rock bassists gravitated towards these amps for their touring rigs. Let's go and have a look at HX Edit and see if we can build up a Guns N' Roses Appetite for Destruction type sound out of my Helix. So let's have a look at a patch that might resemble something that Duff McKagan might use for that Appetite for Destruction type sound. So as I do with all my patches or presets, I've put a Rochester comp at the beginning, and I'm now using the G-Kruger 800. So you can see the controls here. I've got drive, bass, low mid, high mid, treble. So these all mirror the ones that come from the real amp. I've got a channel volume. Remember, this is to make the block volume, not tone changed volume. And I've got a master volume. The boost is that magic grit control that the Kruger has that allows me to dial in some tube-like tone that I would get from a tube amp, but it's sort of simulating that. So the drive is going to give me that volume of the preamp, and I don't want that to clip. I want it to be nice and clean, but the boost is where I'm going to get that sort of overdrivey sound. And this contour control is the one that allows me to give you that voicing that comes with it, with the mid cuts at around 500 Hertz. So that's the amp. So if I turn the cabs off, we'll come back to those in a minute, then the sound I'm going to get at the moment is fairly, I call piano-like. It's very clean, very dry, with a little bit of grit as I dig into it, and that's coming from that boost control. If I roll that boost right off, so I quite like that in there. And so to get a Duff sound, I've got the drive at around 5.5, which gives me that subtle edge. I've got the bass set at 4, so I've pretty well got the amp set flat. I've boosted the mids a little bit, the high mids and the low mids just a little bit, and the treble, and just rolled that bass off a little bit to get rid of some mud. But this is where we sort of want to go for that starting point for that sort of 80s rock sound. Now with the cabs, I've put a crossover in here. So I've just used the split crossover, and this is going to mimic me running the Kruger in a bi-amp mode. So if I put this in at 500 Hertz, then everything that's above 500 Hertz will go to the top process or path, and anything below 500 Hertz will go to the lower path. And this is simulating that bi-amping mode. So I go to the top path, I'm using an Ampeg 4x10. I've put a 57 dynamic, so I want to get a nice bright, clean tone out of the punch out of that 4x10. I've put it distance as 1 inch, so I've put it right on the grill, so I'm getting that good sound. And I'm blowing off anything below 45 hertz to again keep this out of the drummer and put the high cut on. Now, if I just play this at the moment, this should be rolling only signals that come through the above high 500 hertz. So I'm missing that bottom end. It's coming through nice and clean and punchy, but there's no bottom end. So if I add a second cabinet to that, turn that on, here I'm using the 1x15. So this is my traditional bi-amp rig. I've added a 421 dynamic, and this is going to give me a lot more broad range warmth tone that I'm going to pick up off the cabinet. Again, I'm right at the cap edge to get a bit of tone, but not too much woofiness off the speaker, right at the grill. And the same thing, I'm low cut at 45 hertz and at 5 kilohertz. Now, you can swap those between the cabs. You can start playing around with the low and high cut. But because I've got the crossover switch going, I'm not going to worry too much about that. And so now if I play this through with the 2 cabs running, remember, the 4x10 is taking any frequency that's above 500 hertz, and the 1x15 is anything below. As I dig in, I'm starting to get a bit of that growl, and that's coming from that boost, and I've got a nice even tone coming out of both of those cabinets. Now, to get that extra bit of Guns N' Roses out of there, what I'm adding to that is a stereo chorus. The stereo chorus is then going to spread the sound and make it a bit more fat, and a little bit of trill on the back of it. So the main 2 things I've changed really is I've made sure it's a triangle wave, and I've put it at about 30% in the mix. So if I now add that in, so you can hear how that just broadens it out, makes it a bit thicker than before. So there you go, that's it. The key to this Gallien-Kruger is really this crossover switch. So you can simulate that with a split crossover, and then pick any cabinets you want. It could be 2 4x10s, 2 1x15s, the way I've done it now, which is a 410 to 115. Try it with an 810 and a 212 and see what tone you get out of that. It's interesting. Anyway, let's see how this sounds in a mix. So that was my best Guns N' Roses impersonation. I hope that was okay. And you can see if you're looking for that Duff McKagan gritty rock sound, then this is going to be the one that you want to try and use to get as close to that as you can. If you're looking for that Motown or classic rock sound, then this will get you a sound, but it probably won't be as close as what you're looking for. So I'd try and move more to an SVT. So check this video out and see about how to get an SVT sound. Gotcha.